Good morning, everyone. I posted some announcements on the Brightspace main page, so you can read them while we're waiting for everybody else to get here. Just a reminder, we will not have class tomorrow because you are going to be working on completing the midterm. So again, no class tomorrow, do the midterm. Do it before midnight. You have the day to do it. You'll have 2 hours to work on it. In a minute, we're going to talk about what's on it. Good morning, Maria. So to access the midterm, you go up here to quizzes, click on quizzes. Right now it's not available, but once you select midterm exam, it will be available on the day of the exam, starting at 8 a.m. Okay, or you can access it from the main page. You go down to our daily assignments list. Today, you want to finish this quiz before midnight. Tomorrow, you want to work on the midterm. So you can click on the midterm and access it from there as well. Okay, so no class tomorrow, midterm tomorrow. So I have posted a list of topics that will be on the midterm, okay? Also, these are linked to the handouts that we've been going over all semester. So some of these were right back at the beginning, so 8 weeks ago. So if you click on it, it will take you to the handout we talked about, how to get the most out of your reading in college. The techniques we talked about, like annotating, pre-reading, and finding out who the author is, summarizing if it's a really difficult piece of writing, rereading, same thing if it's complex, and reading as a writer to pick up good techniques and avoid bad ones, right? So each of these review topics, if you look over the handout, you should be in good shape, okay, for the midterm. So these are all linked. Okay, these will be short answer essay questions, so you'll have to explain these to me. As far as talking about narration techniques, remember we talked about making sure you establish the context, who, what, when, where, why, select the right details to make your point, that you organize it chronologically or in some other reasonable manner. Process analysis, which we've been talking about this week, right? Give tips and warnings, define things, decide if you're doing an informational process or a directional one. Also, MLA in-text citations, which you guys have been working on for your presentation for Thursday. Commas, which we talked about a little bit earlier on. And today we're going to talk a little bit about fragments because I'm seeing these are the main 3 issues that I see, sometimes run-ons, but I'm seeing more fragments. So we're going to talk about those. Does anybody have any questions about how tomorrow will go? So come here to review for the midterm, go to your book to review for these 2, okay? Here I have linked a page that goes over MLA in-text citations to help you explain. examples. I'm always looking and giving more points if you give me an example of what you're talking about, okay? Do not copy and paste, please, from anywhere. Put all of these ideas and concepts in your own words so I can see that you understand them and can translate them into the way that you would explain them, okay? Same thing with commas. We talked about these main 2 comma rules that you use like 80% of the time in most writing. So if you have 2 full thoughts, also called a compound sentence, linked by one of these fanboys, one of the words that, you know, the acronym stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. The game is over, but the crowd refused to leave. These are also not transition words, so it's good and it helps avoid your writing being choppy to use a variety of sentences. But you always have a comma and then the connecting word. But you do not use the comma if this is incomplete on this side. So you have to test it. It is true that the crowd refused to leave. That sounds like a normal complete thought. Okay. If it's not complete, do not use the comma. You can still use the connecting word. All right. And then the other one that you use quite a bit is a comma after an introductory word or phrase or clause. While I was eating, the cat scratched at the door. Because her alarm clock was broken, she was late for class. So if you can identify the main sentence, anything that comes before it, usually an introductory word or word group. So we've talked about these. Okay, there are other comma rules too. Here's just like the single words that commonly become at the beginning of sentences. We talked about a little bit about items in a series, right? So it's good to know these. These are the essential basic comma rules. Everybody okay with that? So review those because we'll have sentences that you have to identify where the comma goes. After you do the explaining of the concepts and short answers, you'll have like a worksheet style to deal with the commas and the fragments. So let's talk about what a sentence fragment is. Fragments are basically incomplete sentences. They cannot stand alone as a complete thought. They leave you wanting more, essentially. Okay. Usually they are just pieces of sentences that have been disconnected from the thing that will finish the thought, the main clause. Okay. So one easy way to correct them is usually to remove the period between them and the main clause, but then you might have to put a comma in. Commonly, these are the complex sentences. So below the fragments are in red, corrections are in blue. Okay. So this is a complete sentence, and then you can use the test phrase. Remember, it is true that Purdue offers many majors in engineering. That's fine. That works as a sentence. It is true that such as electrical, chemical, and industrial engineering does not quite sound right. Okay. So this is an explanation of the main sentence, and it needs to be joined back to the main sentence. So like they said, you can take out that period. Okay. And you can add the comma in there if this part is not a complete thought. Okay, there's no connecting word, right? Coach Dietz exemplified this behavior by walking off the field in the middle of the game. That's a complete thought. Leaving her team at a time when we needed her. Well, in this fragment, part of the reason people have a hard time spotting fragments is because the first sentence explains the second one, but they have to be joined. You can't separate them. The subject is missing. You have to join them together because if it completes the meaning, it should be together. Okay. I need to find a new roommate because the one I have now isn't working out too well. You'll see a lot of words at the beginning of fragments that are that make them fragments. If we took this word off, the one I have now isn't working out too well. That would fix that also. So you could say, I need to find a new roommate, period. The one I have now isn't working too well. Because, though, adds an element to it. Because the one I have isn't working out too well, well, it feels incomplete now. Because they aren't working out too well, you need to find a new one. you know, you need to finish the thought, but it needs to be part of that main sentence. Okay, so sometimes there's no verb. A story with deep thoughts and emotions does what? What action does it perform? There's no verb there. Okay, toys of all kinds thrown everywhere. Okay, well, that needs to be, they were thrown everywhere. They existed everywhere. Okay, or they found toys of all kinds thrown everywhere. Or sometimes you don't have a subject, with the ultimate effect of all advertising is to sell the product. Okay, the ultimate effect. So you remove that preposition and you'll fix the sentence. So sometimes if I'm picking on you for fragments, look at the beginning of the sentence and see if you remove a word, if it will just fix it. Okay, so you'll be asked also to identify sentences to see if they're complete or incomplete. So this is the incorrect version. These are the ways that you can fix it. Sometimes you start out a sentence one way and then you switch to another way in the middle and it creates a fragment. That's what we call a mixed construction sentence. So just make sure when you're reading through, sometimes if you have a problem with fragments, reading your paper backwards sentence for sentence, like you read the last sentence first and then the one that came before it, and then it disconnects everything and you can see which sentences are not really complete thoughts. But remember that test phrase, put it in front of it. See if it sounds like a normal sentence. All right, questions about fragments? Fragments are just incomplete sentences, partial thoughts. They're also called dependent clauses because they depend on something else to complete the meaning. They have gotten lost, disconnected. Usually you can just join them to whatever they need to complete the thought. Okay, usually it's a sentence that came before it or after it. All right, so this is where you go to do the review for tomorrow, if you have not already seen this. Now I want to talk about why leaves turn color in the fall. Okay, so remember we talked about the directional versus informational process yesterday? Which one is this? Are they giving us directions because they expect us to go out and perform this action, or are they giving us information about how a process works? Please register and we'll see what majority rules. Type your answer in the chat. Or yell it out. Informational. Lily says informational. Come on, register your vote. Grant says informational also. Milos. Maria, Tristan, Mallory, what do you think? Camilla. Okay. Yeah. Nobody expects you to go turn color in the fall, right? This is an informational process that tells you how something happens, right? One thing I should say, some of you are going to go on to study literature. When you read certain pieces of literature, don't forget to put on what I call your fancy voice. Okay? And what I mean by that is read it with the import and sort of the attention that it deserves, right? A lot of times we're trying to read and get through our assignments, and we miss the things that are really pretty or profound or gorgeous if we don't sort of put our fancy voice on in our head. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So when you read this, don't read it quickly. Read it with the attention it deserves if it's a really good piece of writing, which I think this is. So she says, the stealth of autumn catches one unaware. Was that a goldfinch perching in the early September woods, or just the first turning leaf? A red-winged blackbird or a sugar maple closing up shop for the winter? Keen-eyed as leopards, we stand still and squint hard, looking for signs of movement. Early morning frost sits heavily on the grass and turns barbed wire into a string of stars. On a distant hill, a small square of yellow appears to be a lighted stage. At last the truth dawns on us. Fall is staggering in, right on schedule, with its baggage of chilly nights, macabre holidays, and spectacular, heart-stoppingly beautiful leaves. She has great command and control of the language. And if you use your fancy voice, you can better appreciate what she's saying. So if you're in a literature class and you're reading great pieces of literature, sometimes people are like, I don't get what's so great about Shakespeare or Joyce, or they're not always reading it with their fancy voice. They're reading it in sort of the least creative and stolid and unappreciative way that makes them miss what's really great about the writing. She has such great description in here that paints pictures with words that you're not doing it justice if you don't read it in your fancy voice. So just a bit of advice for future and current, like a lot of the essays we read. I mean, the Malcolm X essay, I think, is just such a profound essay about someone teaching themselves how to read and write. The effort that he put into it and the power of, his motivation to communicate an important message to the world. It's just very profound. So really anything should be read with the attention it deserves. And I realize sometimes we don't always have time, but some things are deserving. And don't forget that. She has great description. I love that early morning frost sits heavily on the grass. That's called personification. Frost is being personified. It's giving the human qualities of being able to sit on something, right? And turns barbed wire into a string of stars. Gorgeous, gorgeous imagery, you know? And she has a lot of good sensory information in here too. That's one thing that people forget often when they're describing things is that because mostly we take in things through sight, right? If I say describe a person, 9 times out of 10 people are going to tell me how tall they are, what color their hair is, what their physical features. They won't necessarily always tell me what they speak like or what their mannerisms are, she is also using sight and sound and smell. So dry seed pods rattle like tiny gourds. Okay. So she's also incorporating other sensory information. So because description can be a big part of explaining a process, like if you're writing about a recipe, you're doing a directional process on how to make this, blackened shark, then you might need some good description about what it should look like at certain stages so we feel secure we're doing it the correct way, right? Or if you're kneading your bread dough, stop when it's smooth and elastic. You're using words to describe what things should look like to signal when people are doing things correctly. So she introduces the topic of autumn, and how do you think she organizes this, guys? First, she's like, oh, first when we notice autumn. She got this great introduction, right? What kind of introduction would you say this is? Let's review. What kind of intro technique is she using? What do you think? Stuff of autumn. Love it. So here's some of the info techniques, the intro techniques we talked about. What do you think? Let's hear from some people we haven't heard from yet. Camilla, Tristan. Okay, that is a valid answer. Milos, yes. I would say it's principally description, right? Just some gorgeous wording and word choice and imagery to draw us into this image of autumn. I would also hear an argument for common ground. Can anybody see why I might say common ground? What is she appealing to with the description? We stand still and squint hard, looking for signs of movement. At last the truth dawns on us. Fall is staggering in. I do think the principal intro technique is description. But of course, it's English, so things are rarely as simple. But I also think she's appealing to us on a universal level. What's that universal level that we've talked about? Does anyone live where the seasons do not change particularly? There are countries where they pretty much are consistently, or if you live out in California, there's not a whole lot of change in the weather. So you may have more trouble relating to the common ground appeal that she's using. There are places, there are experiences beyond ours. What's everybody looking for in her intro? Anybody love Halloween? Halloween's one of my favorite holidays. Talking about macabre holidays. Grant, what do you think? That's okay. Does anybody like it when the seasons change? Are you bored of a certain season? Anybody bored of winter right now? I am. You may not be. Winter may be your thing. Okay? But when we've been through a long, hot summer and we get to that ending point where it's been hot and hot and hot and humid, at least if you're here in Illinois or Missouri, then you start to look. You start to look for signs of the next season because human beings like variety, don't we? Yes, Mallory. I'm ready for spring, so I'm starting to look. Is there anything blooming? One of my friends posted a picture. I think it's a daffodil starting to come up, and the weather's starting to get a little warmer, and the trees are starting to bud. So she's sort of appealing to this thing where we all have gotten season fatigue, right? If you live in a place that where the seasons change, we have a tendency to start looking for the next one, right? It's the change, it's the variety that some of us like. So yeah, just like I'm looking for, Lily, you'd like it to stay summer. So this may not, that's why it may not be a totally universal appeal, right? But for those of us, I do. I like the seasons to change. I like living in a place that has all of them, although some of them have become a little weird lately, a little too cold, a little too hot. Um, I do like when it starts changing to fall and I can start getting out my sweaters. And they're going to be pumpkins and there's going to be Halloween and then the holidays will follow after that. So to me, it's like, it's one of my favorite times of the year, you know? But actually, anytime that things are changing and it starts to ease into the next season is we're looking forward to. She's sort of appealing to that notion of watching the signs carefully for the thing that we're looking for. A whole season of leaves. So then she goes into some of the more scientific, practical aspects, right? Now she's got our attention. She's stunned us with the beauty. Now she's like, where did all these colors come from? But she's still using great language. Sunlight rules most living things with its golden edicts. Great vocabulary. If you don't know these words, add to your word power, look them up. You can tell somewhat from context, but basically it's rules. It's sort of governing what happens. Sunlight is deciding. When the days begin to shorten soon after the summer solstice, a tree reconsiders its leaves, which is a really cool way to say it's like reevaluating, right? I need to get rid of them and save up the energy for winter. And June is pretty quick for that to happen, right? When you think about it's already doing that in June. All summer it feeds them so they can process the sunlight. But in the dog days of summer, the tree begins pulling back nutrients into its trunk and roots, tears down, and gradually chokes off its leaves. A corky layer of cells forms at the leaves' slender petioles, then scars over, basically cutting off the nutrients. Undernourished, the leaves stop producing the pigment chlorophyll and photosynthesis ceases. Animals can migrate, hibernate, or store food, but where can a tree go? It survives by dropping its leaves. So she's using a comparison, an analogy to something we're familiar with, which is animals hibernating, to explain why trees do this. They do it to conserve energy, just like animals hibernate. So she's comparing something we may be more familiar with to something the tree is doing so that you can get a deeper understanding of why it does this. Then she talks about how first it's partially green and then there's splotches of color, right? In the gradual process. Then she switches to where the most spectacular colors are. Where the brightest colors are depends often on the weather, the moisture level, the sunlight, There's sort of a formula they have for good color years that it's very complicated. I read it once. It's like first you have to have a wet spring and then a dry summer and then a wet fall. And yeah. So on good years, if everything comes together, you'll get really bright colors. But I don't think it happens all of that much. But she just has great use of language, right? She's got clear topics, and the most spectacular range of fall foliage occurs in the Northeast United States. She's talking about Vermont, New Hampshire, all those places we're familiar with, and in eastern China, because of a rich climate. Apparently in Europe, they don't have quite as vivid of coloring. Then she talks about the different trees turning different colors. You know, and it's not just they turn yellow and they turn red. They, you know, basswoods turn bronze, birches bright gold, water-loving maples put on a symphonic display of scarlet. So we talked about choosing the best words, you know. She's definitely doing that. And she says an odd feature of the colors is they don't seem to have any special purpose. The colors themselves. Okay, they're beautiful, but they don't do anything for the tree. You know, they certainly don't camouflage. It's just sort of this accidental beauty. And then she gets a little philosophical. She says, we call the season fall from the Old English falan, to fall, which leads back through the time to Indo-European fol, which also means to fall, because the leaves are falling from the trees. Yeah. And compares it to the other great fall in religious literature, which is the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Okay. So she's sort of like thinking deeply about what the meaning of the trees sort of having this death cycle every year says about life and death. So she connects it to something more profound, not just telling us how it happens, which she does, you know, explains why they're conserving energy. This is how they cut off the leaves, then they fall. Okay. Chlorophyll production stops. Children love to play in piles of leaves, hurling them in the air like confetti, leaping on the soft, unruly mattresses of them. For children, leaf fall is just one of the odder figments of nature, like hailstones or snowflakes. Walk down a lane overhung with trees in the never land of autumn, and you will forget about time and death, lost in the sheer, delicious spill of color. At least when you're a child, right? And then she talks about just how they fall and how they swoop, you know, rise up and fly like soap bubbles, balloons, birds, rock, careen, swoop. Just gorgeous imagery. And then she compares that to how pilots do the falling leaf maneuver. So she's using her knowledge of everything to connect this process to other things that we might associate with it to make it a richer explanation. Okay. Now, she's going to have a main point she's going toward. So we talked about where's the thesis usually located. It's one of two places. Where is it located in an essay? Do some more review for the midterm. For academic essays, where's it usually at? Milos, for academic essays, they're usually at the beginning, but for this essay and for a lot of essays like you guys did the narrative essay, so informal essays, many have it at the end. So that is correct. Academic essays generally have it at the beginning, that layer between the first and second paragraph, right? Last sentence of the first paragraph, or first sentence of the second paragraph. So if you're doing a one with research, generally your instructor always wants it at the beginning, clearly stated after your introduction. So here it's at the end. So let's read the last paragraph and see if you can identify what sentence you think where she's summarizing everything she said in here about leaves falling, about this mini death, about how it's connected to, you know, Eden and other things that fall. What is her main point about this process? I just love this essay. At last the leaves leave. They crunch, crackle, they shush. In here somewhere. What do you think it is? If you had to lay your money on it, if you had to bet. Valerie, what do you think? Her whole essay is about how gorgeous the leaves are as they're dying, how beautiful they are, right? How delightful, how vibrant, how compelling. Yes, what happens during the seasons changing is one part of it. In order to make that point, she's like, so leaves are dying beautifully, right? Isn't it kind of like it's sort of a contrary viewpoint. We've only got a minute and a half left here, so look at this last sentence. Sometimes one finds in fossil stones the imprint of a leaf, long since disintegrated, whose outlines remind us how detailed, vibrant, and alive are the things of this earth that perish. So it's sort of like this contrary notion she's exploring of something being so gorgeous as it's dying and reminding us how beautiful. It reminds me of like when celebrities die, somebody who's been famous and compelling and charismatic, and then they're suddenly gone, and how the grief is somehow magnified. For me, that's what she's saying. All right, we are out of time. Remember that tomorrow we will not have class. You will do the midterm, and we will meet back Thursday for the presentations. I will open up another session for questions after this. Let me know if you have questions about anything. Otherwise, I'll see you on Thursday.